Hello and welcome to the Raw Preview Podcast. I'm Adam Wilborn from What Culture, joined by the Dadley boys of What Culture, Michael Hamblett and Michael Sidgwick, here to preview tonight's episode of Monday Night Raw. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts where we not only review Raw and SmackDown, but also the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT pay-per-views. We have interviews, roundtable discussions, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on wrestle culture. As I said, joined by Michael Hamblett and Michael Sidgwick, though, to talk about Monday Night Raw. And interesting figures coming out surrounding SmackDown last week, I should say, with another huge drop in viewership, although that may well be related to the NFL draft, of course. But then you could argue, well, SmackDown had Triple H, HBK, Road Dogg on the phone, and Vince McMahon. So is this a sign of change in WWE, perhaps, Hamlet, that they don't need to rely upon legends, but perhaps legends aren't a draw anymore?
Triple H was never a draw.
Yeah, I think calling most of the people in that segment a legend is a bit of a stretch, not least when it comes to ratings. We were seeing that last year when wrestling looked like it was supposed to do. The Raw reunion felt like a turning point for not just for numbers, in the fact it was the last great figure that they were able to do, promising people, but even people's faith in those promises. All those times when they were really cagey about how they promoted Steve Austin and Goldberg because they were lining them up on Skype instead of having them go out to the arenas because they wanted people to tune in on an off chance. I think that one has finally been exploited to its ultimate end. And at the moment, as we saw when Steve Austin was bantering off Byron Saxton and hanging around with Becky Lynch, even then it wasn't going to make a difference. These tumbling numbers can't even really be blamed, I don't think personally, on the post-WrestleMania, like this time of year that we usually have where things just slide off a little bit, how boring some of the Raw and SmackDown matches are at the moment. It's an overarching thing. People don't need wrestling as much as wrestling thinks people need it. It's really surely as simple as that at this point. And there's going to be no moment in any of the storylines or any of the angles, not least with a legend returning, where things are magically going to improve and spike it.
Yeah, I have to agree. As much as I want to be a petulant little dickhead about Triple H and his comprehensive lack of drawing ability when he's not on the other side of the ring as a rising star like Batista was in 2005 or The Rock and Austin were in the year 2000. He's not a huge draw. He's never been a huge draw in the traditional sense of the word. He happens to have been on top at a time at which there was no real competition and the brand was firmly established as destination viewing. That didn't require a huge one overarching megastar to sustain its TV ratings and its pay-per-view buys. But yeah, it just feels like, to use a frame of reference, I, at the moment, prefer AEW. When I was watching Dynamite in the lead up to Revolution, when they were on that incredible run, I just couldn't get on my phone quick enough, waking up at ridiculous hours UK time to watch it. That's how great it was. Even AEW, a company that I still believe, in spite of everything, is still producing great content. And I just can't be bothered that much. Like, I'm waking up a bit later. I'm not watching it live and then going back to sleep. I'm just waking up a little bit later, watching it on demand with a glum sense of obligation. And that's partly because it is my job. I mean, I enjoy it when I watch it, but if you're trying to put yourself in the mind of a casual fan who's not as invested or doesn't have to do it to get paid, then you're probably thinking, I can't be arsed for this. It's just a depressing reminder of everything that's unfolding. And if you look at it, both companies are there's a lot of squash matches. Some of them are great. Some of them are completely repetitive and meaningless. A lot of them don't have any stakes behind them. A depressing amount of just got a bunch of enhancement talents or new performance center recruits or state of Georgia professional independent wrestlers getting told you'll probably get a payday because half the stars can't be bothered to turn up. It's just sad.
We will get to your questions in due course. Thank you, everyone who's donated and submitted questions in the comment section. Just going to give a quick shout out actually to Daz4785, who says, if HBK and Vince were advertised for SmackDown, it wouldn't have mattered regardless. It's gotten to a point now where people hate watching empty arena shows, guys. Is that it? I mean, I was going to ask, how they bring fans back. to at least watching the show. Obviously, attending is a very different kettle of fish, but is it just the case that we just sort of have to ride this one out until we can get fans back in the arena?
I
don't
hope
know.
so. I hope so. Sorry, sister. I hope so, though. Like, we're all pretty much in agreement here that an element of this at the moment for all of us, not just because obviously we do this for a living, but also for people watching, it feels like an obligation. And that's never nice anyway. It's not the head with which you want to like go into a pro wrestling show with trying to engage in storylines. The reminders aren't kind. I would like wrestling shows to be given that kind of cold water in the face feeling from their viewership. It never really happens in response to storylines in a way that you would think. But this is bigger than that because it's bigger than all of us.
Yeah, I reckon if they'd advertised Vince McMahon ahead of time, they might have popped an extra couple of 100,000, you know? He's traditionally always been a draw. Even in terms of viewership, they've been in a state of gradual decline since the year 2000. That's just the fact of the matter. It's reached a point over the last few years where it's accelerated well beyond other TV shows, and it can't just be blamed on streaming services. But despite all of that, Vince McMahon's always been a draw, and I'm quite shocked that they didn't sort of advertise him ahead of time. Maybe it was a trademark impulsive last minute decision. Who knows?
Mm. Certainly
Not much to
impulsive
talk
when he
about
got on the
Raw tonight, is there?
Well, I was just going to say, it's certainly impulsive when Vince got on the microphone. That's one way of describing it. Let's talk about Monday Night Raw, though. One thing that we know is set to go down tonight is a contract signing. Seth Rollins and Drew McIntyre signing the contract for their World Championship match set to go down at Money in the Bank. How do you see this one going, Hamlet?
I think there's reason to suggest that you can have some high hopes for this. The closest comparison I can make is probably the Seth Rollins, Kevin Owens face-to-face that happened before WrestleMania. Rollins has proven great in this character. He's proven pretty good in this setting. Drew McIntyre's not really been my cup of tea personally, but consensus seems to be that he's handling this pretty well. Most people obviously it's hard to gauge without a pop or without any heat in the venues, but just from reading about general responses to him online or like engaging with wrestling, how else you do, it just seems to be the general consensus is that he's doing pretty well under the circumstances. He's a popular guy. He's going to be a full-timer. He's going to be here when all this returns to normal. He's not got any of that stink of that kind of celebrity factor that some of the part-timers, like obviously like Goldberg that we've just had and Brock Lesnar previous to that. So I've got faith in these two more than I've got faith in that dreadfully drab trope that they've been given here, the contract signing. It's not particularly exciting, not least when we're in the empty arena era, and necessity has been the mother of invention, and we've had far more intriguing ways to build to matches than the ones that they would do once a month in a crowd. So I kind of wish that was more interesting, but the wrestlers have given me no reason to believe this won't be okay.
I kind of have to disagree. This is going to be one of those segments where the full strangeness, the full blossom of this strangeness always catches me off guard when I tune into it. Half the time that's because I'm waking up bleary-eyed at like 4 o'clock UK time in the morning, and then you put it on and then, oh God, this is the situation ongoing. So it's always strange, and then it's always so dissonant to watch WWE do WWE things without WWE fans or WWE glitz or WWE glamour or WWE huge drone sort of production shots of an arena that might not even be full, but they can damn sure make it look full. And then when they do a very WWE thing in this weird empty arena, it just looks stupid. They've done one before. They did the Undertaker AJ Styles contract signing when the club was still there and they were involved. And it just, whenever they do an angle that they would ordinarily do in an arena, it just looks so uncanny valley stupid that I can't get on board with it. And it might not get wholly ruined by the fact that, yes, Drew McIntyre is playing off nobody and yet contriving to do it somewhat well. But I just think it's going to look so theatrical that without fans there, it will look like this immersion break in rehearsal that it just can only look like without fans.
Am I right in thinking tonight's show's pre-taped?
Yes, I think so.
Would it not be better? I know WWE haven't got a great track record of this to do a contract signing, in a meeting room, which is far more controlled and would work better.
I would love it, Wilborn, right? I would love it if we watched this show tonight and that doesn't happen, and then you, having just thought of that within seconds on the back of somebody else's thought, have come up with a better job of doing a more realistic segment than WWE will do tonight.
thing is, they can't do that, you see, because Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa wreck the meeting room, and people that could come in and clean it up aren't essential workers, a bit like WWE, so they can't get anybody in to fix it unless Triple H does it himself. So they literally don't have the facilities with which to film that skit.
Fair enough. Michael Hamlet, what's Bobby Lashley going to flip tonight?
God, I don't care, but I want to watch it. The table has already been flipped by Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano. He picks it up and he flips it again. The absolute highlight of last week's Raw was Bobby Lashley flipping a tire and then flipping a bigger one that they stretched out over 3 separate segments. I couldn't have been more into it. Could he end Raw in the way that Nexus did once and just go and flip the table with Michael Cole sat at it, or flip the ring, or flip those barriers that are there for no reason? All right, we're being a bit flippant, but Bobby Lashley...
Piss off.
Thank you. That's all for you, Cedric. As we discussed on the review of last week's Raw, Bobby Lashley doing Bobby Lashley things is better than Bobby Lashley trying to sports entertain. Like, Bobby Lashley doing an assault course was absolutely fantastic. Bobby Lashley flipping a tire unexpectedly was brilliant when we were all sat wondering if this was going to be the end of Bobby Lashley and Lana. No, he's going to flip a tire. Like, the less elegant they get with his incredible physicality, the better. So I'm sort of optimistic that we're going to get something interesting to talk about coming off the back of this.
Yeah, I kind of halfway agree. There's scope here, there's opportunity here for WWE to finally produce some socially health conscious, responsible content. Just have Lana or whomever actually lives in real life with Bobby Lashley film him on a mobile phone doing amazing feats of athleticism, because I'm not entirely sure what it's like in the state of Florida, but here in the UK, you are allowed to venture outside once a day for exercise. I imagine my exercise looks a little bit different than Bobby Lashley. My exercise, for those wondering, is that I wait until my kids are asleep. I go outside at the end of my street. There's a wooded area. I go out on my bike, knowing full well that there won't be any families because the kids will be asleep. So I won't be like riding past people and coming into dreaded contact. And then after 5 minutes, my legs start to hurt. And then I confuse that with the mythical burn that people who exercise regularly feel and think, oh Christ, I must be losing some weight here. This is the burn. This is the burn. I think the burn usually is like after like a good half an hour of consistent cardio and not just cramp. I don't think cramp's the burn, but that's my exercise for people who want to peek into my life. I expect Bobby Lashley's to be markedly different. I expect it to not be utterly pathetic and woeful like mine is. And I would like to see that, because I think that's something to aspire to. See people on social media going, you should use this time to not be such a fat prick. Do you understand? And I'm thinking, oh God, yeah, I feel guilty now. I feel guilty for working 5 days a week and then parenting all weekend long and having no days off. Yeah, maybe I should spend that 1 hour of my time not being a fat bastard. Right, okay, out on the bike we go. Maybe Bobby Lashley can set a socially responsible and spectacular looking example to me on Raw tonight. Or could just flip a bigger tire. And not only could he flip a bigger tire, he could build up that he's going to flip a tire in 1 hour if you stick around as Raw rolls on. I can't believe the content we are producing right now.
Speaking of utterly pathetic and woeful, Nia Jax's buckle bomb was one of the big talking points of last week. I've given up. I've decided, judging by the reaction to it, it's indefensible what she did, from the initial reaction to it to the reports about Kyrie saying that she wasn't set. It's universally agreed that was a horrendous, incredibly dangerous botch. Even what is next
Not
for
nice
Nia?
thing to say about Nia Jax.
What is next for Nia Jax then? Do they salvage this? Do they even lean into the fact she's a dangerous worker to go up against Becky Lynch, considering the history they've got there?
Yes, I mean, that's obviously what they'll do. This is just, again, WWE will spend its lifespan repeating itself in terms of how they book their top stars, how they will regurgitate the same tropes, the way they will tell the same stories. And if you recall, we and several other wrestling media outlets were kind of disgusted by the way that Nia Jax just so bizarrely struck Becky Lynch full force in the face on the eve of Survivor Series, and this followed a few complaints. I believe Ember Moon or her husband alluded to how dangerous she was without grabbing headlines on social media. And in the aftermath of all this, we kind of petitioned or hoped almost that Nia Jax would get a stint in developmental because it was for the good of the welfare of all of her opponents and colleagues in that division. And instead, after we tracked all the evidence and compiled everything, and we came up with a good argument that Nia Jax realistically could probably benefit from a trip back to developmental, WWE instead had her come out the very next week on Raw and go like this, as if to go, oh, it hurts a little bit when I, almost ended Becky Lynch's career and ruined the biggest match of her career. They will lean into it for heat. They will not punish her. They might pretend that it didn't happen, much like they are pretending real life isn't happening. But yeah, they're certainly not going to do anything responsible. I mean, it's this company.
The conversation after the match last week kind of reminded me of just how grim the current situation of flying wrestlers in for these shows is. It already feels a bit wrong that we're seeing loads of wrestlers wrestling, and then it somehow felt even worse when you were reminded that they put their bodies on the line to do this, and not just in the ways that we all currently put our bodies on the line if we go to the supermarket. On a good day, this is an incredibly dangerous way to earn a living, and it's never been more dangerous. And injuries, like the injuries could occur in this current situation, just brought that into even sharper focus. The last thing you want when arguably the wrestling shouldn't be going ahead is for people to be getting hurt at the same time. It felt all sorts of wrong last week, and I don't know, like you're always wary. I think after Sidgwick sort of alluded to the last time, there was a bit of a backlash on people that suggested that like there was unfair attention being paid to Nia specifically because everybody gets hurt. And I think Seth Rollins was used as a comparison, Pete, because he had that little slightly rough streak where people were getting knocked in his matches. But this again, her comeback is so recent. Her comeback is so soon. It'd be one thing if she'd been back a year and had this like flawless CV and the matches were getting better. But the squashes still don't look great, and somebody's been hurt 3 weeks deep. It doesn't look great.
Someone who's only just recovered from a horrific concussion at TLC as well. Doesn't help matters here. But one person who is hurting people in kayfabe at least is Shayna Baszler. What do you make of how WWE are booking her post WrestleMania defeat to Becky Lynch, who just passed 600 combined days as a women's world champion, I should point out?
We alluded to this or mentioned it outright on the Raw review that this is how they should have portrayed her all along, as someone who can just very badly injure someone or, potentially end their career with her bare hands or her bare feet in this instance instead of a vampire. This would have been a far more effective way of getting her over. And in fact, anything she did after the vampire bite could never, ever escalate dramatically to the point where it was either going to be farcical or anything else she did subsequent to that was just going to feel like a diminished return. It was such a intentionally grabby moment that it was just always snake bitten. So I do like this direction. I feel like if the opponent or the victim sells it well enough, it feels quite harrowing in that environment. It's much like when Tegan Knox got injured in Full Sail. When it's quiet in there, it's very quiet. Obviously, when it's loud, it's very loud. But the acoustics and the setup of that kind of venue make it feel very quiet when it's quiet. And it's a similar thing in a similar building, because when the victims of Shayna Baszler are sort of like crying out or feeling a little bit, it just feels like all you can hear is their pain, and their pain's far more pronounced and emphasized. That in turn gets Shayna Baszler over as someone who can very, very, very badly hurt you. I think with the Shayna Baszler push so far, she's been kind of the highlight on Raw the past couple of weeks, because they finally found a way to make a WWE performer congruous to an environment which is very much antithetical to WWE.
It's strange because what could happen here is the exact same thing that happened with Elimination Chamber. You use one very clear device, which is just Shayna Baszler's total dominance, to get her over to the point where she is unstoppable and she cannot be denied, and she has to win the title in the match where she's got it lined up. But that's happened once before and she lost. So this feels as if they're trying to reset by doing what we've already seen once before. Only this time she'll do it to win a briefcase, which makes her job substantially easier. And then what you have to do is keep her that strong in order to make this Becky Lynch rubber match, if that's indeed where we get to, this actual definitive, right, can Baszler beat Becky one-on-one, all things equal? It's odd that we're kind of going through these motions. I agree. I've enjoyed Shayna Baszler for the most part on Raw, but it feels odd that we're going through these motions because we have to, because of what happened at WrestleMania and what was already proven quite like a needless loss in hindsight. I wasn't against it at the time, but like already now, because of what we've had to see on Raw ever since, this has felt more like a rebuild than they probably should have needed to do. It's still only April 2020. She's been on the main roster all like 3 or 4 months. She should still be in that like dominant first glow of the call-up. I have no doubt that she'll win Money in the Bank at this point either. I thought if there was anyone that could challenge her, it would have been like Sasha Banks for storyline reasons. It feels nailed on that she'll win that now. So they might as well just keep doing everything they're doing with her.
Yeah, it's amazing that they just made every wrong decision in my eyes, apart from the Elimination Chamber, which I thought was excellent. I mean, having her in the Royal Rumble but not win it seemed weird. And then, yeah, like you say, they're always playing catch up a little bit, but we'll see how they get on. I feel like a Money in the Bank win is getting us certainly back on the right track, and what they're doing, I do enjoy on Monday Night Raw, even if it does look horrific. Right, let's move to some of the questions in the comments. Don't forget, you can stick them down there and ask them to the boys as long as we've got time. Mr. Phoenix, thank you for your donation. Asking about cinematic wrestling, saying, what happens to cinematic alternative wrestling when the world comes back to the shows? I don't mind it in small doses, but I'd be pissed to pay a ticket to watch a screen. Sage, why don't you take this one?
Mr. Phoenix doesn't like me very much, so I think Hamflet should take this one. He's got this on Twitter.
I welcome more of this as one of those like bright lights from this dreadful era. I hope that they've seen this as a worthwhile experiment. It's got to be saved. It's WWE, so they'll overdo it and they'll ruin it. But if it could be just saved for things like WrestleMania, what it does is that it tees up an Undertaker match with substantially more excitement, because you've got something like the Boneyard match now as a new example. Prior to that, it was like the Graveyard Dogs, and it's like, well, that was a bit of a minor miracle, and you can't just tag him with Roman Reigns every time and hope it's going to work out for the best. This is a situation where if they want, they've bought like 10 or 15 years worth of brand new Undertaker matches because of the magic of Hollywood. A character like Bray Wyatt on a big stage can be given something like the Firefly Funhouse instead of, I don't know, let's say the Daniel Bryan match at the Survivor Series. It feels like such a great opportunity that has come from forcing the hand. I just hope they're careful with how they use it.
Good question for you here, Sige, from Megatoby09. Do you think AEW could pull off a G1 style tournament?
I would say so. Obviously, I would say that. I do love the round robin format, as I've said in advance of the NXT shows, because it just feels like the closest emulation of sport that either company has got to in the wake of the Wednesday Night Wars. I love the permutations. I love the drama. Every single match has got kind of a permutation. I would like to see AEW experiment with it again, but under different circumstances. Weekly TV is harder to do it than on the block schedule of the 4 nights per week that New Japan run it, because you're opening yourself up to risk doing it on weekly television, depending on the size of the tournament, because there's always the possibility that someone can get a knock or get injured. So yeah, I think the booking, they can certainly do that. They've got an incredible knack, which the G1 is perfect at, of plotting 2 different performers on a collision course. We'll see it with Cody and Darby on Wednesday night, where it feels like neither man can take the loss, but ultimately there will be a very good ramification for the person who doesn't, and for the person who does, it will mean all the more, because they haven't just been put up against there by some sort of ham and egger. They need to beat someone who's been booked very, very strong to then advance themselves, so they can get themselves into positions where it feels precarious, but in fact it all works out for the best. And I think that the round robin tournament format will suit that kind of booking, that audacious, conclusive booking that they've proven themselves so adept at.
And, I do enjoy the fact that NXT have incorporated that with their Cruiserweight Championship.
Yeah.
It's awkward, the situation, let's just say, with Drake Maverick. We've covered that quite a few times.
Completely ruined it.
Matt Rains says, good afternoon, Sidgwick, Wilborn, and others. Just to follow up from the Triple H pod this morning. Yes, we did a Get the Table on Triple H's 25 years in the WWE, which you go and check out by searching for What Culture Wrestling, talking about the highs and lows of his career. We also talked about that segment, as we mentioned, on SmackDown on Friday, with Vince McMahon being Vince McMahon turned up to 11, shall we say. Matt Rains says, Vince doesn't look well. Surely it's time to hand over the company to Triple H very soon. Michael Hamlet, your thoughts?
Thank you to that well-dressed Twitter troll for that question. It's tricky, though, because he could have been handing this over years ago, couldn't he? Like, nothing will get in the way of Vince McMahon and doing what Vince McMahon does beyond death. And I don't mean that to sound really morbid, but everything we've ever been told about Vince McMahon from everybody, literally everybody that's ever worked with him, including his own son-in-law Triple H, is that he always wants to keep his hands on the wheel in WWE. We were told when the XFL was coming back that it wouldn't make a difference and he'd just do both, even though that was surely a physical and mental impossibility at his age. And yet, although there were stories about him taking a bit more of a backseat this year, there are counter stories that suggest that he's still phoning in livid when he's seen a Raw that he doesn't like, or he's making Paul Heyman feel stressed out in his new job, or he's brought back Bruce Pritchard because he needs somebody that he trusted for decades as his right-hand man. There are all these little clues that suggest that Vince McMahon will still keep that hand on the tiller for as long as he possibly can. So all the optimism about Triple H even getting the role seems flawed, because it's going to take ludicrous circumstances to make it so. And even if it does, I think Triple H is more unproven in that role than people realize. These rumors coming out about him, like Vince losing a bit of faith in him because he's currently losing the Wednesday Night War against AEW, I don't think paint the fullest picture of Triple H's man management so far, because what we're going to see now is a generation of wrestlers that have come up through that NXT system and have kind of been molded into a WWE style all over again, which was for so many years a criticism of Vince McMahon's micromanagement. It just so happens that it's Triple H and Shawn Michaels' WWE style instead of Vince McMahon's. So I'm not so sure he's addressing one of the fundamental problems from a talent perspective, or for that matter, a storytelling perspective. We'll see. And I'd like to be optimistic, but I don't think it's just as easy as Triple H fixes everything.
So what do you think to that?
I think it's a big issue. It feels like the last 2 years in particular of NXT have brought into focus that Triple H isn't suitable, in my opinion, to take WWE forward. You can moan at length about how I receive the big match NXT style. You can absolutely adore it. You can think it verges on parody. You can have any kind of artistic, subjective interpretation of the creative product that they offer. The fact of the matter is they haven't promoted, in my opinion, one absolutely huge angle, one must-see angle, one incredible promo that just sells you on a takeover. The takeover events that they've produced after the move to the USA Network have largely, in my opinion, sold themselves on the fact that you're going to see a series of absolutely fantastic pro wrestling matches at an NXT takeover event, because the takeover brand is enriched with such an incredible legacy of matches of that nature. Something like Tommaso Ciampa versus Adam Cole, I think it was a divisive match, but those who loved it loved it. You can criticize the booking, but you can't criticize the work or the effort or the technique. It was all quite incredible until the finish. But ultimately, for weeks and in fact months, all Tommaso Ciampa said or did was either beat up the Undisputed Era, get beat up by the Undisputed Era, or claim that Daddy was in fact coming home. There was literally nothing else to that angle whatsoever. There was one premise of the story. There was no chapter. There was no entertainment value. It was all very pull-faced. I don't think Triple H's grasp of how to book television is anywhere near headline-grabbing or entertaining enough to fit into WWE's mold. I think the stripped back approach worked very well for years relative to the main roster, and it was a different thing under Reinwald's pen than it is now. And I think it was very entertaining, very emotive, like it had a real soul to it. But now that he's gone, it just feels like a glorified super indie with the most bare bones of storytelling elements that, for me, just aren't hitting it. And I think the ratings bear that out.
Final couple of questions here. Bass Hoban says, do you think WWE have kind of forced AEW's hand for Double or Nothing as a new company? When the industry leader runs pay-per-views, the money men have to as well. What do you think to that, Sidge?
Right, okay. My interpretation on this is that both companies are morally reprehensible for running. I don't think either of them should be running, but ultimately, what kind of saddens me and frightens me about this is that the TV companies are obviously at fault because they're, at some point you must lead to the conclusion that they are just getting held almost to ransom. But what strikes me about this, and it's very sad and very worrying, is that the NBA can tell whichever network they're on, we're shutting down. We're absolutely shutting down. We cannot be seen to be putting our performers, our athletes in risk. It's the same with every other sporting league globally that is operating right now. I understand that rights fees are a huge thing for pro wrestling. They are essentially sustaining it completely, given how few people relative to the past go to the shows. Wrestling is way more precarious. I don't think it's necessarily a case, maybe more so in the case of WWE, it is, given what we know of their past, but I don't think it's a case of a gung ho, screw everybody attitude, where wrestling, we need to be out in front, controlling the narrative. Maybe there's a degree of that, and it is in the DNA. Cody and Vince McMahon have kind of, or Triple H through Vince McMahon, have said similar things on television, in fact. But I don't think there's even a consideration to say, right, we're stopping down. We are absolutely stepping down, just like the NBA did, because they don't have the power, in my opinion. They're nowhere near as established or enduring as an institution, as a legitimate sport. And the fact that they are running and feel like they have to run with no compunction makes me think that pro wrestling, despite this rights TV era that we're in, does not feel secure in itself to tell the TV masters to piss off.
Big final question here from you and Benny. What do you think has to happen for AEW to take over WWE as the big dogs of the industry? And if you think it will happen, when can we expect it? I'll let you both answer this, but Hamlet, you go first.
I don't know. It depends how you look at it, because from a perception standpoint, they've already done it in the eyes of those that like really, really love pro wrestling storytelling. They've reversed a lot of trends that WWE have locked in for 2 decades about how you have to do wrestling in the mainstream a certain way, and that's to their enormous credit. So to a sizable part of the audience, it's like WWE no longer needs to exist because AEW satisfies something that WWE couldn't do. Financially, it's like they're decades off being self-sustained, but they too are billionaire backed. So whilst AEW is its own enterprise, it probably isn't turning over the money that the Khan family are. Like, they don't need to, because the Khan family have got the money. They're, as a startup, in an incredibly different position to where WWE were. As a startup, they need to grow ultimately because they need to keep their networks happy, they need to keep their paymasters happy, and they want to grow as a business because they want to be seen as independently profitable permanently and going forward. But I think in terms of bigger, I think everything's so much more splintered than it used to be. I think now AEW can be satisfied if they're pulling, say, if 1 million was what the TNT wanted after 5 years or something. If they're pulling what TNT are happy with numbers, they can be considered bigger because they've got a tighter relationship with their audience. They've got a better online presence. The programs trend in the ways that WWE's done. They feel more progressive and more topical and things like that. WWE have got, I think, an unstoppable grip on being thought of as the byword for pro wrestling. But that's AEW's big challenge, is to somehow make people not say WWE when they mean wrestling. And that's decades worth of work, decades.
In any kind of entertainment medium, whatever is hip or whatever is critically acclaimed, and that's obviously how AEW is perceived, especially relative to WWE, very rarely will it become the mainstream, especially now in a cultural age where there's basically no such thing as a water cooler event. Like a band like Nirvana, who was so against the grain of what the culture was at the time before they blew it up and completely transformed it, you'll never get Nirvana again. The closest things you'll get to a genuine brand new powerhouse was something like Game of Thrones, which captured the imagination, Marvel, because comic book films weren't as in vogue as the typical blockbuster were 20 or 30 years ago. It's going to take something goddamn special for AEW, which realistically, more than anything else, is a throwback pro wrestling league done incredibly well with the odd sort of futuristic ring styles and storytelling in terms of what the Young Bucks, Omega and Page are doing. But ultimately, it's a love letter to pro wrestling, and pro wrestling itself is, if you look at every single metric of data, a thing of the past. Every time you read about AEW doing great and WWE's anecdotal lack of popularity and its tumbling domestic ratings, you will read something along the lines of, oh, WWE have just renewed their deal in India and it's for absolutely huge sums of money. or WWE, their Middle Eastern deal is going to get huge, or you'll find some country that you never even thought pro wrestling existed in has signed a new fee. They are a global powerhouse, as Hamflett points out. They are the synonym for professional wrestling, and I just think that, you know, you never know how all of this unfolding situation is going to turn out, but say it didn't happen, it was going to take some graft for AEW to get even on that level, much less topple them in terms of the marketplace globally.
Exactly. I'm sure this was a conversation we'll be revisiting very soon. Don't forget to join us for the Raw review tomorrow. You can get that as a podcast by searching for What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can let us know the thoughts on everything we've discussed today on Twitter at What Culture WWE. And watch, they can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
Sidgwick.
Follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow our lovely editor Phil at Phil My Chambers. Thank you to everyone who's donated and asked questions today. Make sure you join us 4 p.m. tomorrow. Myself, Adam Cleary, and Adam Nicholas answering all the WWE questions you want answers to. You can already submit them to me on Twitter or at What Culture WWE, wherever. We'll be answering a whole load of your questions 4 p.m. tomorrow. But for now, this has been the Raw Preview Podcast. My thanks to the Dadley Boys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.
Bye.